On a March morning, the sky above Westlake International Airport was as clear as crystal, but the ground was chillingly cold not because of the wind, but because of the stairs. The engine growled as an old time-worn pickup truck slowly rolled across the private tarmac reserved for billionaires. The door opened, and from inside stepped out a black man. His coveralls were frayed at the shoulders, his shoes stained with oil, and his hands, rough, dark, and calloused, were hands that had touched machines worth tens of millions of dollars. His name was Derrick Coleman, and he was 36 years old. He was an engineer specializing in the repair of luxury aircraft. No one in the VIP area knew his name, but they could smell that he didn't belong here. Behind the reinforced glass of the executive lounge, expensive suits tilted their heads toward each other, lips curling into knowing smirks. Contempt didn't need to be spoken. It was in their eyes that they stood and turned their backs as if he were a glitch in their system. "This is the expert we called to fix Mrs. Blake's jet." Andrew Mitchell, operations director of Blake Aerospace, sneered at the person beside him, deliberately speaking loud enough for Derrick to hear. "I thought we hired the best engineer in the region, not some guy who just crawled out of a roadside auto shop." Derrick heard every word. He was used to comments like that, far too used to them. Instead of reacting, he lowered the tailgate and gently lifted out his old toolbox, and each tool inside had once saved planes in distress, thousands of feet above ground. Under the gleaming tarmac, sunlight danced across the fuselage of a Gulfstream G650, a $65 million jewel suffering from a technical fault no engineer on site had been able to diagnose. And now its fate rested in the hands of a man the entire lounge had just dismissed. Then, the rhythmic click of high heels echoed across the concrete. Victoria Blake, a 43-year-old CEO of Blake Aerospace, emerged from the operations building. She wore a tailored navy suit, her brown hair curled into place, her gaze cold and her stride decisive, as if every step she took was a command. She didn't look at Andrew, didn't ask anyone anything. She looked straight at Derrick. "How much time do you need?" she asked without preamble. "Depends on the problem, ma'am," Derrick answered, eyes steady. "You've got 1 hour," Victoria replied, glancing at her gold watch worth more than Derrick's annual salary. "Impress me." No one in the operations room understood what was happening. But Derrick did. He wasn't just here to fix a plane, he was here to fix a prejudice. The Gulfstream G650 gleamed under the morning sun like a mechanical masterpiece, flawlessly beautiful, absurdly expensive, and dangerous in ways no one suspected. Derrick approached the aircraft as if visiting a gravely ill patient, hiding wounds beneath a designer cloak. Others had examined it. The certified experts had plugged in diagnostic scanners, swapped out chips, and tapped lightly on circuit boards as though knocking on the hollow glory of their reputations. But they hadn't seen it, couldn't feel it. Derrick didn't need a diagnostics board. He needed to listen. And within 3 minutes of opening the main panel, he found the issue. The pressurization system, the aircraft's lifeline at 45,000 feet, had failed. Not partially, not an electrical glitch, it had collapsed entirely. One more landing gear retraction, one more engine roar, and the cabin would become a flying morgue. Rapid decompression, oxygen loss within 30 seconds. The pilot, passengers, and crew are all dead in silence. No one in the control room knew this. Not a single engineer who'd been near the plane had spotted it. Only Derrick, the man they had just mocked. He didn't say a word, didn't need applause, didn't need anyone asking, "Is there anything I can do to help?" He bent down, opened his worn-out tool bag, slipped on thick gloves, and got to work. Each movement was precise, nothing extra, nothing wasted. His technique resembled surgery. Every tightened bolt, every slight adjustment performed by hands trained under the yellow light of an old hangar on the outskirts, not under the halogen glow of $100,000 aviation academy. From behind the glass wall of the control center, the eyes kept watching. Some still smirked. Some shook their heads. But one gaze didn't waver. Victoria Blake, no longer the challenging stare from earlier. Now it was observation, calculation, silent astonishment. 30 minutes passed. Derrick tightened the final lock nut, wiped his hands with an old frayed cloth, closed his toolbox, a familiar ritual that seemed like muscle memory. And truthfully, he had done this all his life. Not for glory, but if he didn't do it right, people would die. No applause. No one said thank you. Because for people like Derrick, doing it right was expected. No one praises a mechanic for keeping a plane from falling out of the sky. He turned and began walking back toward his truck, expecting nothing more. Until the sound of high heels echoed across the tarmac once again. Victoria Blake walked out. Alone. She marched straight toward Derrick, leaving behind confused faces and puzzled glances. "How long do you think it would have taken them to discover the real issue?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. Derrick looked up at her, unflinching. "They never would have," he said flatly. "If that plane had taken off, no one would have survived long enough to know why." The wind swept across the runway, silence sharp as blades, heavy as guilt. And then Victoria spoke 3 words. "Come with me." The steady rhythm of Victoria Blake's heels echoed across the concrete, each step challenging the hierarchy of an industry she had helped build. No one stopped her. No one dared to ask. She walked straight to the man the elite engineering team had mocked less than an hour ago. Derrick Coleman stood there, hands still smeared with engine grease, his coveralls stained by time, eyes devoid of surprise, only readiness. He was used to disdainful stares, but never accustomed to invitations from the powerful. Today, someone like Victoria Blake broke that mold for the first time. She stopped before him expressionless, her gaze sharp as steel. No pleasantries, no thanks. Not even a smile, just a single straightforward question. "What's your full name?" Her voice was steady but slightly lower than usual. "Derrick Lawrence Coleman," he replied. She gave a slight nod as if confirming something internally. Without another word, she turned and walked straight toward the executive headquarters, the kind of place someone like Derrick had never entered, except maybe to mop the floors. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. Victoria didn't look back. She didn't need to speak. Derrick understood, and he followed. Behind them, technicians and supervisors in the control room could barely conceal their shock. Andrew Mitchell, scowled eyes ice cold, his hand tightening around an empty coffee cup, so hard it nearly collapsed in his grip. Things were slipping out of his control, something he never thought possible, certainly not by someone like Derrick. They walked through the VIP lounge, where framed accolades lined the walls, an all-white board of directors, senior engineers with Ivy League diplomas, and Andrew himself grinning proudly next to the first jet, equipped with the G7 pressurization system. Derrick recognized that photo. He had seen it 5 years ago, exactly 3 days after he was fired for lack of technical capability. The executive room door opened. Victoria gestured for him to step in first. No one said a word. No one dared breathe too loudly. The silence was thick, like soundproof glass, everyone aware that something monumental was unfolding. But none of them realized that this moment, a black man with grease-stained hands was about to be invited into a high-level strategy room, was about to trigger a collapse the aviation industry had never seen before. As confused eyes watched from behind the frosted glass, Derrick Coleman stepped in, not just carrying a toolbox, but a truth buried far too long. The door closed behind them, sealing Derrick and Victoria away from the noise, the pretense and the judgmental stares of those who had long assumed who deserved to be there. The room was a refined blend of modern technology and silent power, automatic frosted glass walls, cool lighting, a walnut conference table, and an LED screen hidden behind a library wall. Victoria motioned for Derrick to sit across from her leather desk chair. She remained standing, arms crossed, her eyes never leaving his face. "Do you know," she began, her voice low and firm like a jet engine, "the G7 pressurization system saves my company over $80 million in operating costs yearly." Derrick didn't reply. She continued walking to her desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a thick folder. "This is the complete development dossier for G7 designs, simulations, and early tests, all filed under Andrew Mitchell's name. But there's something odd." She removed an old blueprint, yellowed with age, its corners stained with oil. Every original draft is marked with the initials DLC, Derrick Lawrence Coleman. Derrick's eyes flickered for the first time, not from surprise, but from memories resurfacing. Victoria stared at him without flinching. "I found 3 patents and 4 Technology Innovation Awards officially recognized by the Department of Transportation, all linked to G7. But not one bears your name. You know why, don't you?" Derrick nodded. His voice was calm, like reciting a forgotten report. "Because no one hires a black engineer from a poor neighborhood to lead a development team. And engineers still have to pay the electric bill." Victoria didn't wince, didn't object. She pushed the folder toward him and reached into the drawer for a tablet. The screen lit up, displaying a chain of old emails with a prominent subject line, "Recommendation for Termination, D.L. Coleman." One email, sent 3 days after Derrick finalized the G7 design, bore Andrew Mitchell's signature. "You were terminated for lack of technical capability." Victoria read aloud each word, cutting like she was stripping away layers of deceit. "And yet you were the one who saved my life this morning with the system they stole from you." Derrick leaned back in his chair, gripping the armrests. No anger, no pain, just a calm forged through thousands of hours spent in silence under flickering fluorescent lights in cold warehouses where only skills were needed, but never names. Victoria sat across from him, not as the icy CEO anymore, but as a woman staring directly at a wound hidden too long. "Derrick," she said gently, "I want you to tell me everything. Not because I don't believe you, but I want to know how you've lived the past 5 years while the world believed you weren't good enough, weren't worthy, and still kept working and fixing as if your honor hadn't been stolen." Derrick looked at her for a few seconds. Then he answered without hesitation, "Because I knew one day someone would need the name they tried to erase." A knock pounded urgently on the door, impatient, unapologetic. Before Victoria could respond, the door burst open. Andrew Mitchell, his once crisp shirt now wrinkled, tied loose, and forehead slick with sweat, stepped in tense as a drawn wire. "Victoria," he said, feigning calm, "the board is waiting for you on the conference call. We need to discuss today's flight." But his sentence stalled as his eyes landed on Derrick, sitting comfortably in a high-backed leather chair, a place Andrew never imagined someone like Derrick could occupy. Andrew's expression darkened, his voice turning cold. "He's still here. I thought he was just here to fix the plane." Victoria didn't rise. She leaned slightly toward him, swiping her finger across the tablet screen. "Actually," she replied, "we're discussing intellectual property rights. Specifically, the G7 pressurization system." Andrew's face went pale. His eyes narrowed, lips tightened. Then he let out a strained chuckle, trying to appear unfazed. "Victoria, I don't understand. What could a mechanic possibly contribute to a high-tech system like G7 that was a group project led by me? Interesting, Victoria said, turning the tablet screen toward him, because I have the original design file digitally signed by Derrick Coleman. And she emphasized, I also have your email recommending his termination for lack of technical capability exactly 72 hours after his final design was submitted into the system. Andrew stepped forward, reaching for the folder, but Victoria was quicker. She pulled it back and closed it. What are you doing? He asked, straining to stay calm. I'm investigating, she replied. As of now, I am suspending all your executive privileges, effective immediately until the internal review is complete. Andrew stepped back, face flushing with fury, but still trying to hold composure. You don't have the authority. The board will be notified within the hour. Victoria cut in, rising for the first time, voice firm and unyielding. And if you have any dignity left, I suggest you leave this room before I call security. Andrew stood frozen, jaw clenched, fists tightening. For several seconds, the room held its breath, waiting to see if he would argue, lash out, or deny everything like he always had. But then he turned around without a word, stormed out, and slammed the door behind him, leaving behind a silence heavy as metal. Victoria looked over at Derrick and exhaled for the first time since Andrew had entered. Derrick said nothing. He was used to men like Andrew Strong only when cloaked in authority, but he crumbled the moment the truth surfaced. But this time, he didn't have to hide anymore. He didn't need to write his name on a toolbox. He didn't have to work in the shadows. He was being heard for the first time in years, not because he begged, but because he carried the truth. As the echo of the slamming door rippled through the hallway, Victoria remained still, eyes fixed on the space where Andrew had just vanished. The room fell into an unusual stillness, not the soundlessness of logic, but the slow absorption of a truth far larger than what had just transpired. Then she turned and walked back toward the seat opposite Derrick's. Her steps, for the first time, carried a trace of softness. No longer the powerful CEO, no longer the sharp commander on the tarmac, but a human being about to speak what she had kept inside for over 2 years. She pulled a black leather briefcase from the drawer and laid it on the table, opening it with a ritual air. Inside were not just papers, they were files, memos. Dozens of complaints, once labeled handled internally, vanished without a trace. Anonymous testimonies from demoted technicians. Data from sudden resignations filed just weeks after proposing innovations. And in the center, a map riddled with red pins, each marking a suspected case of systematic intellectual theft. Victoria spoke slowly, word by word, as if she wanted Derrick to hear not just the meaning, but the weight. You're not the first, but you are the first to leave behind undeniable evidence. 3 years ago, I received an anonymous email with a G7 blueprint signed with the digital initials DLC. I didn't believe it, but what made me start to doubt was when I compared. The lines, the layout, the technical language. It didn't match Andrew's style at all, so I began investigating quietly. Over the past 2 years, our General Counsel Olivia Grant and I have been tracing every file, changing versions in the system and deleting records. And then, she tapped the tablet lightly. We found a pattern in the past 10 years, at least 7. Black or Latino engineers were fired or pushed out within a month of submitting breakthrough innovations. Every one of them replaced by someone else. And every one of those someone else's was promoted. Derrick leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the documents now projected on the large screen behind her. He recognized some names he had worked with. One in particular stood out, a young Mexican-American engineer who had redesigned a fuel-efficient stabilizer. He had resigned for personal reasons. Now Derrick understood. He whispered almost to himself, "So this wasn't just me." Victoria nodded. "No, this is a system. A system that learned how to silently extract genius from those who didn't fit its defined standard." She paused for a few seconds, then looked him dead in the eyes. "And I need your help to dismantle it." Derrick raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were part of it." "So did I," she admitted without flinching. "Until I realized if I don't use the power I've been given to clean out the rot inside the company my father built, then I'm no different than Andrew." The air in the room thickened, like every molecule was waiting for Derrick's answer. But instead of replying immediately, he unzipped his backpack and pulled out a hard drive. He placed it on the table. Quietly, resolutely, "Here," he said, "is everything: internal recordings, system, revision logs, the original design files, login histories, and voice memos Andrew thought no one saved. In one of them, he tells a tech assistant to wipe the metadata from the draft and replace my name with his. And there's also an email he sent to HR, 'Get rid of that guy before he starts demanding rights.'" Victoria didn't speak. She reached for the drive and placed it in the secure safe beside her desk. "We have 2 weeks," she said. "Company-wide shareholders meeting. I need enough evidence to make this indisputable. I need your help to end this, not just for yourself, but for every person whose name was erased." Derrick sat in silence for a moment, then he nodded. Slowly, firmly. "Then it's time," he said, "to unbolt this entire system piece by piece." As Victoria locked the hard drive into the vault, she didn't realize that what she held wasn't just legal evidence. It was a detonator that could blow apart an entire decayed belief structure. Derrick remained seated, eyes sharp, not like an engineer waiting for instructions, but like a man ready to reclaim what had always been his. He didn't need more time to think. Time had already passed. 5 years of silence. 5 years on the margins. 5 years of watching, remembering, and preparing. "You think I only kept the design and a few recordings?" he asked, his voice deep and cool like forged steel. Victoria paused mid-movement, looked up, tilting her head slightly. Derrick slowly opened a second bag, older, its corners frayed, but its contents meticulously wrapped in triple-layer anti-static shields. He pulled out a bundle of paper documents, each page numbered carefully alongside an SSD drive, protected by a personal encryption key. "I grew up in a working-class neighborhood," he said, not looking at her, almost narrating to himself. "If you didn't want to be robbed, you must learn to hide things like a survivor. When I got fired, I didn't leave with rage. I asked, 'What do I still have to protect my name?' And the answer was everything." He handed Victoria a sheet with a detailed index of the files, the first G7 sketch with its original timestamp CCTV footage from the development lab, internal emails with phrases like, "We'll slap Richard's name on it and deal with that black guy later," alongside dozens of other materials proving intellectual theft. But what stunned Victoria into silence wasn't the evidence itself. It was how Derrick had preserved it. Every file was encrypted with the name of an engineer removed from the system. Each data entry came with a short note on the day they were fired, the idea they had proposed, and the person who replaced them afterward. Derrick wasn't just reclaiming justice for himself. He was dismantling brick by brick the wall of injustice that had buried people like him beneath its foundation. Victoria stepped forward, picking up each document, as if touching something never before acknowledged, a layer of truth, quiet and persistent, that had lain beneath her feet for years. She turned to him, speaking for the first time, with a tone no longer executive but deeply human. You kept all of this for so long. Alone. Derrick looked at her eyes steady. You have no idea how easy your world is. As for me, every time I fixed a plane, I'd watch engineers like Andrew get new contracts, land magazine covers. With what I had created, I wasn't rich enough to sue, didn't have the power to fight back. But I had time and memory and a whole lot of hard drives. Victoria smiled, not the polite kind often seen in boardrooms, but a genuine response, perhaps the first in years, where she truly felt hope. Then she said, "We don't just have evidence, we have a criminal dossier." Derrick nodded. "And a clear goal. I don't want an apology. I want to redesign this entire system from within, and I want the people who are buried to be named properly." Victoria stepped toward the digital board and pulled up the complete 2-week plan, the shareholders' meeting schedule, attendees, press coordination, internal power groups, and every strategic step of the takedown now set in motion. The screen's light reflected across her face, but what truly illuminated the room wasn't the tech. It was the forged alliance. A powerful woman, a man whose justice had been stolen, and a dossier as thick as the history they were about to rewrite. 2 weeks later, the top floor of Blake Aerospace headquarters, generally reserved for shareholders and elite press, had transformed into a silent battlefield. Laid out across the long ebony boardroom table were quarterly reports, growth indices, and one curious addition, a projector connected to a private server, something never seen at previous shareholder meetings. The chair at the head of the table still belonged to Victoria Blake, but this time she wasn't alone. Seated to her right was Derrick Coleman, dressed plainly but with purpose, his eyes no longer those of a mechanic, but of a man who carried an entire buried system on his back. Andrew Mitchell was also present, but the usual confidence was gone. He sat at the far end of the table, tense, scanning the room for old allies in a space that had shifted away from him. Then Victoria began, not with financials, not with future strategy, but with a single sentence that froze the room. "Today we're not here to talk about profit. Today we talk about the truth." The lights dimmed. The screen came alive with a timeline graphic, names of 7 engineers who had been fired, skin color, dismissal dates, submitted innovations, and their replacements stacked into a cold, ruthless logic. Then came the audio recording. Andrew's voice, clear, smooth, undeniable. "We need to scrub all traces of that guy. Don't let anyone know the system was his. G7 is ours, and customers won't buy into something made by a black guy from a poor neighborhood." No one breathed. The room fell under the weight of a silent rising fury, gasps, chair shuffles, a pen dropping drowned beneath the storm brewing behind composed faces. On the screen, the original G7 blueprint signed digitally by Derrick. Then a security video shows Derrick being escorted out of the company 5 years ago. No explanation. Andrew shot up, face pale, pointing at the screen. "This is a lie. He's just a technician. He didn't have the skill to design G7. This is slander." But his voice trembled, echoing through a room where no one looked at him as a colleague anymore, but as the accused. And then Derrick stood. He didn't say much, just one line enough to shatter the air like glass. "I don't need you to believe me, because justice doesn't need applause." Victoria gave a signal. The back doors opened. The General Counsel, Olivia Grant, walked in with an independent audit representative. In their hands, the legal findings' original authorship confirmed as Derrick Coleman's verified acts of industrial plagiarism and documented ethical violations and internal manipulation by Andrew Mitchell. Silence from shareholders. Murmurs from the press. Some lowered their heads, not out of shame, but from the weight of having stayed silent for too long. Victoria looked at Andrew one last time, then declared, "The Board of Directors hereby suspends all titles and representation rights of Mr. Andrew Mitchell. The investigation continues, and the company will take all necessary steps to restore the dignity and compensation of those harmed." Andrew had nothing left to say. No one walked him out, and no one walked Derrick out because he wasn't leaving this time. He was staying right where he had always belonged. 3 months after the groundbreaking meeting, Blake Aerospace was nearly unrecognizable. Where once hung portraits of white founders, now stood plaques of engineering achievements with real names, dates, and faces of those who had been left behind. The top floor, once an unspoken no-go zone for technicians, was now the office of Derrick Coleman, Chief Innovation Officer and co-lead of the most ambitious overhaul in the company's history. No grand desk, no oversized leather chair. Just a whiteboard, a few aerodynamic models by the window, and a row of open desks where young minds from once overlooked communities now worked with him to develop the next generation of engines. They came from where he came from, neighborhoods labeled as dead ends, trade schools dismissed by recruiters, alleys never marked on engineering hiring maps. And now those same faces were sketching the future of aviation by hand with heart and the memory of rejection. Downstairs, Victoria Blake was at a press conference leading the launch of the FAIR Intellectual Property Recovery Initiative. At the podium, she declared, "We're not fixing the past. We're opening a future where intelligence isn't priced by skin color, college name, or zip code." In her hand was the blueprint for the Innovation Equity Fund, the first in the US, co-founded and led by Derrick, aimed at funding training and protecting innovations from minority communities. And in a newly built tech hub in the very neighborhood where Derrick grew up, now called the Blake Coleman Community Tech Center, the hum of 3D printers, engineering simulators, and lessons echoed like a promise. This was no longer where the rejected came from. This was where names began, names the world would have to remember. At the ribbon cutting, a reporter asked Derrick, "Would you say this is an epic revenge?" He smiled gently, not bitter, but clear-eyed like someone who had come through a storm and stayed whole. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to open doors. Because I once knew what it felt like to stand outside a door I helped build. And now my job is to ensure it never closes for anyone told they didn't belong." On the makeshift stage in front of the center, Victoria stood beside him, hand in hand, unveiling the new nameplate. A metal plaque that read, "Where talent meets justice." And beneath it, a single line, "Derrick Lawrence Coleman. From undervalued to unignorable." 1 year after Derrick Coleman entered that boardroom with nothing but a hard drive and a buried past, Blake Aerospace was no longer just a company. It had become a rare symbol in corporate America, responsible rebirth. At the launch of a revolutionary fuel-efficient engine which could reduce aviation emissions by over 40%, the auditorium was packed with young engineers, media, and technical universities. And when the name Derrick Coleman echoed from the microphone, the room rose in ovation. But what mattered most to him wasn't the cheers. It was the faces in the front row. They were once denied internships for going to community college. The engineers were rejected after listing Southside Atlanta as their birthplace. Those said, "Your idea is great but not practical for our company." Now they were sitting not as audience members but as co-authors. Their names were on the new patents. They were the core developers of the Genesis 9 engine, a technology that would reshape the aviation industry in the decade ahead. On the left side of the room, Evelyn Coleman, Derrick's mother, wiped tears from her eyes. She had spent her life cleaning office buildings where she'd been asked to walk around to not disturb the company image. She once quietly bought her son his first engineering books from a used bookstore near the train station. And now she sat in the seat of honor, her name spoken aloud as the one who planted the seed of a new chapter in American innovation. Derrick took the stage. No notes, no script, just truth and heart. Sometimes we measure justice the wrong way. We think it's when the harmed get their seat back paid and praised. But real justice is when no one else has to go through it again. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be the last person who ever had to crawl through a narrow door so we can build a hall wide enough for others to walk through easily. Behind him, the screen displayed a single line, "Talent shouldn't need to apologize to be seen." The ceremony ended with something unscripted. A young Asian-American engineer who had once worked night shifts at an auto garage to afford tuition stepped up and handed Derrick a prototype built by her community scholarship team. Derrick said nothing. He bowed his head not out of modesty, but in recognition that legacy doesn't lie in titles or shares. It lives in the doors you leave open for others. And as he stepped off the stage, not alone, but surrounded by voices from the future, he knew the nameless engineer he once was no longer needed a name tag. He had become living proof of one simple but powerful truth. If you're not invited to the table, bring your chair and leave it behind for the next one.